In 2008, superhero movies were already popular, but few people could have predicted that a film based on a comic book character would become one of the most acclaimed movies of the 21st century. Nearly 2 decades later, The Dark Knight remains more than just a Batman movie. It's a crime thriller, a character study, and a philosophical battle between competing visions of human nature. While audiences often remember the film for Heath Ledger's iconic performance as the Joker, what has allowed it to endure are the questions that it asks beneath the action and spectacle. What happens when the institutions we trust begin to fail? How far can a society be pushed before its moral foundation starts to crack? And can order survive when confronted by pure chaos? Are some of the questions raised by this film. Set in Gotham City, struggling to escape its criminal past, The Dark Knight follows Batman as he faces an enemy unlike any he has encountered before. The Joker doesn't want money, power, or control. He wants to prove a point. He believes that beneath civilization lies something far uglier and that given the right circumstances, anyone can be broken. The film arrived in 2008 during the final year of George W. Bush's presidency. America was still living in the shadow of the September 11th attacks, and many of the political debates of the decade revolved around security, terrorism, surveillance, and the balance between freedom and safety. The war on terror had reshaped public life. Governments were being given expanded powers to monitor potential threats while citizens debated how much liberty should be sacrificed in the pursuit of security. These questions extended far beyond politics and began appearing throughout popular culture. Viewed through this lens, The Dark Knight feels less like a traditional superhero movie and more like a reflection of the anxieties of its time. The Joker functions as a terrorist figure whose primary weapon is fear. Batman is forced to confront difficult moral compromises in order to stop him, and Gotham itself becomes a city struggling to preserve its values while facing an enemy that refuses to play by any rules. Rather than providing easy answers, Christopher Nolan uses this conflict to explore a question that remains relevant today. How far should a society go to protect itself before it begins sacrificing the very principles it claims to defend? What truly separated The Dark Knight from many of the contemporary superhero films of its time wasn't simply its action or performances, it was its willingness to ask difficult questions about fear, morality, justice, and the fragile nature of civilization itself. It was groundbreaking for the superhero genre because no other superhero film took its world, characters, and conflict as seriously as The Dark Knight. Yes, there were superhero films and shows that took themselves very seriously before The Dark Knight, including its predecessor Batman Begins, but The Dark Knight was what set a standard for superhero movies to come. The filmmaking on display is absolutely exceptional. I loved the choice of emphasizing scale and slickness instead of trying to go for something a little more stylistic like Tim Burton or Joel Schumacher. Gotham in the film, and in the Nolan trilogy in general, doesn't look like it came from a comic book. It looks like a real city, and that's because it was. The film was primarily shot in Chicago, so that's why the city looks slick, cool, and vast, but also like there's an abundance of crime. Not to mention, the wide-angle shots are not only there to look cool, they're there to establish the scale of the story. Since it's more than a superhero film, it's an epic. But it's not just the wide-angle shots. The cinematography throughout the film looks gorgeous and conveys so much emotion while saying very little. The organized, slick look of Gotham is meant to make every murder, stabbing, explosion all the more shocking. Because you're watching a city that looks like it's maintaining order and structure, and you're watching it fall apart. The editing is something else that stood out to me. I love how there are several scenes where these characters are having a conversation and the editing takes a breather. There's able to be longer shots, slower camera movement, and less music that feels abrupt. Essentially, anytime there's order being placed on Gotham, the camera work and the editing almost seem mechanical and professional, and the pacing slows down, while anytime one of the Joker's plans is going in motion, the editing takes a different turn. The camera moves a lot more, you switch from all these different perspectives at once, and the music ramps up and becomes more intense, almost like the Joker's plans are so intricate and complicated they involve different wheels and gears to be turning in motion at the same time, which are heavily noticed when the Joker crashes a party in a penthouse, rigs the ferries with explosives, escapes from the MCU while the police retrieve Harvey from being kidnapped and attempt to also save Rachel, robs a bank owned by the mob, and corrupts Harvey while blowing up a hospital. The editing is supposed to contrast the order that's being implemented by characters like Bruce Wayne, Jim Gordon, and Harvey Dent by having it be more controlled and subtle, and contrast the chaos that's being implemented by the Joker with his intricate plans by making these scenes fast-paced and energetic and switching from multiple perspectives at once. The score for the film was composed by Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard, and it's considered one of, if not the greatest superhero score ever composed. Obviously, in terms of iconic, you have the original Danny Elfman score from Batman '89, and you have the Superman score from '78 by John Williams, but in terms of the intricacy of the composition and how brilliant it complements the film, the Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard score is exceptional. The Joker's theme in this film not only adds to the suspense of the scenes he's in, but it's disturbing on its own. And the fact that it's able to be subtly woven into a lot of scenes and not feel abrupt is impressive, because even though sometimes the score can definitely be heard, the disturbing nature of the scene takes the center stage to the point where the disturbing music is unnoticeable. But the music still adds a lot to the scenes. It's not like an MCU film where it feels like temp music for the background. The music adds to the scenes, but the score never feels like it's abruptly interrupting those scenes. There will usually be very subtle cues to where you feel like something is being built up, and then you realize something is being built up, and then there's the payoff, which makes it satisfying. And the fact that the score feels like it's constantly in motion adds to the film, because something important to the narrative is always happening. There's not one scene in the film that doesn't push the narrative further. There are scenes where it takes a breather, of course, but they're still pushing the narrative further. And that's because of excellent pacing. Something else I have to note about the editing is that this film could have been convoluted as hell and overstayed its welcome, but because the film moves at such a fast pace, the film remains engaging despite its 2.5-hour long runtime. Overall, the filmmaking for the film is exceptionally executed, and it all serves to build momentum and immerse the viewer in a world that's clearly falling apart. Batman in this film feels like he's the most realistic out of any other Batman interpretation, which is helped heavily by Christian Bale's phenomenal performance. Batman works outside of the law, ironically, to instill law and order on Gotham while all of these criminals run loose. So when he sees Harvey Dent, the new district attorney, he holds a bit of hope that finally someone is willing to clean up Gotham through the system. Batman doesn't feel like he has to work outside of the law as much to instill law and order, because there's finally someone who wants to clean up Gotham through the system. He's still Gotham's crime fighter, but he finally got what he wanted from all the crime fighting. Someone who's inspired to get the scum off the streets. As for his personal life, there's been growing distance between Rachel and Bruce ever since Batman Begins, which can be noticed in their lack of chemistry when they have scenes together, which can be heavily exemplified by the fact that she's going out with Harvey. Anyway, talking about Bale's performance, I know the Batman voice is unintentionally goofy for some, and yeah, it's easy to make fun of, but I don't personally mind it. Sure, I make fun of it sometimes, but it works for me, because if Batman sounded like Bruce Wayne, then it would probably be easier for criminals to identify it's Bruce Wayne, so narratively it works for me. Something I forgot to mention in my filmmaking section is the choreography. The fighting is hit or miss for some people, but I personally really like it. The way these scenes are shot could be better, but the choreography itself is pretty great. And even then, the camera work doesn't bug me as much as other people, because at least you can tell what's happening. It's not a disorienting mess for no reason. You can still follow what's going on. It could just use better camera work is all. When I talk about the camera work for the action scenes though, I mean for the fighting scenes it could be better. The chase scenes are fantastically shot. Not to mention, the choice to use practical effects over CGI is impressive. The Tumbler looks great. Anyway, enough about the filmmaking, let's go back to talking about Batman as a character. I love how throughout the film he tries to not only instill hope onto the citizens, but throughout the trilogy he tries to maintain hope that the city could be cleaned up. But there are certain points in this film and the trilogy in general where he gets challenged. In this film, it's the Joker. Batman wants to believe in justice and clean up the streets, which is why he praises Harvey Dent for wanting to make Gotham a better place. And even throughout the film, even when Harvey is at his most corrupt, you can tell Batman genuinely wants to help Harvey, not defeat him. By the end of the film, Harvey falls to his death, and at this point he's killed 5 cops. If anyone found out that Harvey is a corrupt killer, all the criminals that he locked up would go free, and the citizens of Gotham would lose faith in the justice system. Batman is willing to sacrifice his image and take the blame for the murders to keep the criminals locked up, which completely goes against Joker's philosophy in the film, which I'll get to in a little bit. What makes Batman interesting in this film is that the Joker almost acts as his strongest test against his no-killing rule. Obviously, his no-killing rule in isolation doesn't make him interesting, but the fact that there's a character who's willing to challenge him on that is where he becomes interesting. That interrogation scene alone contains so much tension, not just in the fact that Harvey and Rachel were kidnapped, but also in the fact that Batman almost crossed a line he couldn't recover from. Overall, Batman in this film is fantastically acted and portrayed by Christian Bale and pays a lot of respect to his portrayal in the comic books. But what about the Joker? Let's be honest, Heath Ledger gives quite possibly the greatest performance for a comic book character of all time. He's so good in this movie that he inspired a wave of cringy impressions on the internet. Even people who don't like this movie think his performance is exceptional. But what am I saying with all of this? Well, for only having a screen time of 44 minutes, he left such a big mark on this film. The thing about the Joker that makes him interesting is not that he's crazy, because in this film he's not crazy. It's his philosophy, which is that everyone, no matter how good they are, can be pushed to their limits and fall into corruption when confronted with chaos. In a way, he's proven right that anyone can fall into corruption despite their good nature, but not everyone will. The Joker also proves in this film that even the most powerful people in Gotham, the mob bosses, that people are afraid of, are also capable of being manipulated and taken advantage of. Something that needs to be highlighted though is that he isn't necessarily proven right, in a way. He wanted to prove that everyone, no matter how established their moral code was, could easily fall into corruption if placed under chaotic circumstances, maybe even turn out like him. Harvey Dent is proof that anyone with an established moral code could fall into corruption, but characters like Batman and the fairy sequence in particular prove that not everyone will. Batman wants to establish order while operating outside the system. Gordon wants to establish order while working in the system. Harvey Dent represents order collapsing into chaos, and Joker is a representation of chaos as seductive evil. I mean, just look at the many scenes where he's manipulating people like Harvey. Not to mention, since he wants people to break their moral code and composure, there's many scenes where people either want to beat him up or outright kill him. That's because he wants to break the facade that people put on, and the mob, police department, people operating outside the system, the citizens of Gotham. He sees the performance and wants people to break character. I also love the ambiguity of his backstory. We never know where he came from, what his upbringing was like, or why he turned out this way. There's glimpses of his psychology and philosophy throughout the film, but we get next to nothing about where he came from. Even the scenes where he's explaining how he got the scars, most of those scenes are for fear and manipulation than anything. Even the why so serious scene is for fear and manipulation. Not to scare and manipulate Gamble, the Joker's going to kill him anyway, but for Gamble's henchmen to be feared and manipulated by him. But even if I was wrong, even if those scenes explained parts of his backstory, it wouldn't matter anyway because he's still a psychopath who's an agent of chaos, as you mentioned before. In some ways, you could even argue that the Joker is one of the least corrupt characters in the film, because how could one become corrupt if they were evil to begin with? Also, the ambiguity of his backstory is the film subverting the trope that you'd normally associate with serial killers and murderers like Jason Voorhees or Jigsaw, or even the ones you'd see in crime documentaries like Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy. A tragic childhood that diagnoses a serial killer so that we can understand where they came from and possibly find a solution. In The Dark Knight, we don't get a tragic backstory from the Joker because where he came from doesn't matter. He's a psychotic murderer who's an embodiment of chaos. Because the Joker is so far gone that even if we could get a backstory or an answer as to why he's a monster, he would never change. The film wants to subvert the idea that the Joker can be saved if we could understand where he came from, but the absence of a backstory is why he's all the more terrifying, because we can imagine anyone, including ourselves, becoming like the Joker. All in all, the Joker is still one of the most interesting villains of all time because of the many layers to him, despite having a shorter screen time than you might expect. And that's because of a brilliant performance by Heath Ledger and amazing writing and direction from Christopher Nolan. Harvey Dent is one of the most underrated characters in the entire film. He's a prime example of his own philosophy. You know the famous quote, "You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain." Harvey is a prime example of a man who had faith in the justice system. He becomes Gotham's district attorney so that he could clean up Gotham through law and order, and at first he succeeds, but as the film progressed, he became more cynical. There's glimpses during the second act of Harvey still wanting to clean up Gotham, but outside of the law. The turning point for his character was when Gordon gets shot. Up until this point, Harvey seemed optimistic and genuinely inspired the citizens of Gotham without a mask. As mentioned multiple times, he's Gotham's White Knight. Bruce even said that Harvey has locked up more criminals than Batman ever did. However, as soon as Gordon gets shot, he seems way different. He starts interrogating an Arkham inmate, but he lets his cruelty take the wheel. What's more tragic about his backstory is that he genuinely seemed like he did everything right. He put the mob behind bars, he became a symbol of hope, and he did all of this through law and order. Yet he loses everything by the end. He loses Rachel, his hope for Gotham, and has been failed by the people he trusted the most. I also really like what his coin represents for his character. At the beginning, he believed that justice, morality, and personal will can overcome corruption, which is why his coin, technically, can never land on a bad side. It's until he gets kidnapped and half his face gets blown off, where his coin now has a burnt side. The burnt and clean sides are supposed to represent the change in his philosophy. That the world is random, cruel, and unpredictable. Why is it that even the best people have awful things happen to them, and why is it that the worst people get away with awful stuff? It's because of chance. Cruel and unbiased chance. That philosophy aligns with the Joker's, which is what he wanted to prove to Gotham, that even someone as moral and well-intentioned as Harvey was, could fall into corruption and become just like the Joker when confronted with chaos. The Joker's philosophy was that the world is unpredictable and chaotic, so trying to instill law and order on it was a joke. Not only that, but he also believes that humans live in a hypocritical world, like how Gotham wants to clean up the streets of criminals through law and order, yet they let a masked vigilante who works outside of the law to help the Gotham City Police Department. Harvey's arc, essentially, is that he slowly starts to not only embody the Joker's philosophy, but also believes it. What's interesting though is that Harvey and Batman both win and lose in different ways. Harvey lives long enough to see himself become the villain, but he dies being remembered as a hero. Batman's most heroic deed, coincidentally, is to be seen and remembered as a villain because he takes the fall for the murders, so he's not able to inspire Gotham because his heroism dies alongside being seen and remembered as a villain. Essentially, Harvey fails the Joker's moral test because he proves the Joker right. He proves that anyone, no matter how established their morality was, can fall into corruption and become just like the Joker when placed and confronted with chaos. This is where Batman succeeds, because while there were several points throughout the film where Batman was challenged by his moral principles and beliefs, he never falls by breaking his no-kill rule. So in a way, he passed the Joker's test because he proved the Joker wrong. Where this becomes interesting is the public's reaction to both of them. Harvey, while he fell into corruption, gets remembered as a hero, while Batman, despite maintaining his principles throughout the film, gets remembered as a villain. Essentially, their arcs show the reality of both of their characters, while the public reaction to both of them are the complete inverse. Overall, I wanted to mention the importance of Harvey Dent as a character because he honestly doesn't get mentioned enough. Yes, I know it's because Heath Ledger's Joker is incredible, but I honestly think Harvey Dent is one of the most important characters in the entire film, and Aaron Eckhart gives just as fantastic of a performance as Heath Ledger's because his character goes through one of the greatest arcs in film history. The film touches on many themes that are associated with post-9/11 anxiety. The line between order and chaos is something that is prevalent throughout the film. Batman believes that law and order can clean up Gotham, and if he acts as a symbol of hope, he can inspire good in the citizens of Gotham. The Joker believes that establishing order in a society is a joke because he believes that if you remove comfort, routine, and security, people reveal who they actually are. Essentially, he believes that people only follow the rules when they have safety, security, and comfort. When functioning institutions begin to crumble and people don't have their needs met, they abandon their principles. I mean, he tried to prove that with the ferry sequence. There were also many debates post 9/11 about moral compromise. How far should people compromise their morality as a response to extraordinary threats, and the film touches on this question through Batman. There's a scene where Batman chose Lucius Fox's strategy to catch the Joker. By having access to every single phone conversation in Gotham. The film doesn't present this cleanly though, as Batman is immediately called out by Lucius Fox saying that this is wrong. It's supposed to prove that in some ways, even Batman is capable of compromising his morality when faced with chaos, which brings up further questions that have been debated by governments post 9/11. How much freedom should be sacrificed in order to prevent further attacks, and should one person hold an unrestricted amount of power if it means ensuring the safety of millions of people? Like I said in my Harvey Dent section, the film also brings up chance versus control. Harvey Dent from the beginning believed he could control his chances through principle, justice, and standing up for what's right. He believed that anyone with those values could make their own luck and overcome corruption. It's until he gets his face blown off and a side of his coin gets burnt where his philosophy takes a change from optimistic to downright nihilistic. From that point on, he believes that the world decides fate, not individuals, that it doesn't matter how principled an individual is, the world is cruel, unpredictable, and chaotic, and that is the ultimate decider of fate, not individuals. There's also a consistent theme throughout the film about symbols carrying weight and power. Batman is a symbol of hope outside the system, Joker's a symbol of chaos, and Harvey is a symbol of justice through the system. The ending with Gordon and Batman wanting to maintain Harvey's legacy is them knowing the power of symbols, myths, and legacies despite the reality being a lot more complicated. They want to preserve Harvey's legacy not because he was a good guy, but because they see the importance in preserving hope for individuals to have faith in justice and morality. What's interesting about this film is that it's not a movie driven by Batman physically defeating the Joker or Two-Face. It's a film about competing philosophies. The Joker, Batman, Commissioner Gordon, Harvey Dent, all of these characters are not battling out physically, rather battling out philosophically. They all want to prove their philosophies to Gotham, and the film doesn't stop by having one character being proven right or wrong. In fact, all of these characters have flawed philosophies throughout the film. The Joker gets challenged when he sees none of the fairies blow each other up. Batman gets challenged about order and justice through breaking the law several times throughout the film to prevent more chaos. Harvey's belief that people make their own luck is challenged when he goes through a tragedy that strips away the control he thought he had over his own fate. And Gordon's faith in the legal system is challenged when he realizes that preserving Gotham's hope requires compromising the truth and relying on methods outside of the law. Last but certainly not least is the film's relevance and legacy. Its influence can be seen through the trend of comic book films that came out after The Dark Knight. The gritty tone, serious dialogue, the social and political commentary, it can all be traced back to The Dark Knight. I'm not saying this is the first movie to ever tackle complex or mature themes or have a gritty tone or any of the things I mentioned before. Hell, I'm not even saying it was the first comic book film to take itself seriously. But what I am saying is that it created a trend of comic book films that started taking themselves seriously and used the comic book genre to tackle mature and complex themes. Obviously, films like Sin City, Blade, even its predecessor Batman Begins took themselves extremely seriously, but this was the movie that made Hollywood realize there's a market for mature, realistic, and complex comic book films. As for its thematic relevance, the themes revolving around post-9/11 social commentary are still discussed to this day because 9/11 was traumatic not just for the American people, but for millions, potentially billions of people across the world. Stuff like mass surveillance, wiretapping, and safety versus civil liberties are all continuing to be discussed to this day. I know it isn't a very long section, but I felt like I had to talk about how it continues to be relevant and pave the way for comic book films to come. In conclusion, The Dark Knight is arguably not only one of the greatest comic book films ever made, but one of the greatest films ever made in general. It has thought-provoking themes, fantastic filmmaking, fleshed out and interesting characters, has remained influential since its release, and is also extremely relevant. This is one of the few films I would genuinely consider perfect because every single element is not only perfectly executed but exceeded my expectations of what to expect from a superhero film, which is why Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight will be remembered in decades to come.